Time again for another installment of The Basics, and on today's show I want to get back to the Star Trek card game and talk about treaties and why you don't see a lot of players using multi-affiliation decks, and I'll explain why this is the case. So let's get started, shall we? Now, you've heard me talk in previous episodes about how non-aligned personnel really complement a deck no matter what affiliation you're using. They will add extra skills and help you complete missions and overcome dilemmas. The other way of doing this is to make a deck that is dual or even tri-affiliation and use treaty cards to bring them out. So how a treaty card works, and I'll use the obvious one. Plays on table. If you have no side decks, your Federation, Romulan, and Klingon affiliations may mix, cooperate, and ignore affiliation battle restrictions, but may not attempt opponents' missions. Or other ones like this. Plays on table. Your Bajoran and Dominion affiliations recognize as treaties. They can now mix and cooperate. That's how most of the treaty cards, if not all of them, work. And what this does is it allows you to use those multiple or dual affiliations to complete missions and do dilemmas like I mentioned earlier. But because it takes these event cards to bring them out, you would have to have a lot of these in your deck for it to work, because you just know that your opponent is going to pull cards on you like interrupts or other events that get rid of these cards. And the more cards he has in his deck to get rid of treaty cards, the less likely it is you'll be able to have your two affiliations or three cooperate enough to complete missions. And if you're relying too much on multiple affiliations and treaty cards, you're going to be stuck very quickly and you're going to accomplish very little. That's why personally I don't recommend using treaty cards and dual or tri-affiliation decks, and I more have you go towards non-aligned, because they can't be nullified, and because there's no treaty cards. Non-aligned work with pretty much anybody given the circumstances. So if you can make a dual or tri-affiliation deck work, that's great, but it's not going to work for long. There are just too many other cards out there that your opponent probably has in his deck that will nullify these cards, and then you're back to start. And you have to add more personnel from each affiliation and more ships. So it's a double-edged sword, it really is. If you are wanting to try a dual affiliation deck, what I would do, and I have actually done this with previous deck building, is I built a Federation deck that also relied on, say, 5 or 6 Klingon personnel and an extra bird of prey thrown in there. And I had several of the Federation/Klingon treaty cards in my deck. And because I was relying mainly on the Federation, when my opponent finally did get around to getting rid of my treaty card, it wasn't a big deal and I still ended up winning. But if you do a 50-50 split between your affiliations and have to put 3 or 4 of these treaty cards to make it work, that's when you're going to run into problems. So it's doable, but on a very small scale. Your second affiliation, make sure you have key personnel and maybe 1 extra ship, and that's it. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother. Stick to non-aligned personnel, or have a Q's tent side deck with a few extra cards that you may need. That's all for today. Have a great day.